Hello everyone, thank you for joining me today. This is Taliesin McKnight, and today I wanted to make a quick video about the union of opposites and the mystical marriage. Now, the mystical marriage could be interpreted in a great number of ways. It could be viewed as union with the outer personality, with the higher self, or knowledge and conversation with one's holy guardian angel. It may be perceived by some to be union with the divine, but the mystical marriage actually exists on many different levels. There are many different levels in which conjunction and the reconciliation of opposites is key and central. And today I wanted to talk about this primarily in regard to belief systems and in regard to the outer personality reconciled with a deeper wholeness of who and what we actually are. And this could be seen by some to correspond to what the Swiss psychologist Carl Gustav Jung talked about in regard to the individuation process, the assimilation of the shadow, and various aspects of that. And really this goes into many different levels. The mystical marriage is not just a union with between the outer personality and the inner self. It's also a marriage. It has to do with energy currents of the body. If you take this perspective, which seems to combine some of the Eastern mystical concepts and see certain correlations with the Qabalah and things like that, the twin pillars of Hermes, that you have the balance of the two energy polarities of Ida and Pingala, which this balance is needed to affect safely the rising of the Kundalini of the central path. And again, you see the two opposing pillars on the tree of life and the rising up of the central axis or pillar. So there are many different ways of looking at this union. So there is this concept of a union between the outer personality and the higher self, knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel, and various things like that, or also the crossing of the abyss and the annihilation into the all. Okay, so there are different ways, there are different levels of this mystical union and conjunction, which is represented as the great work, as a male-female figure in alchemical symbolism, but this exists on many levels. Today, I'm talking about this from simply the perspective of ideas, belief systems, and in regard to the outer personality. So, for one thing, I think it's important to achieve wholeness to balance the outer personality with its hidden opposite. And this really gets into what is often referred to as shadow work. There is within every timid individual a repressed inner warrior. There is within every dry rationalist, there is an inner inhibited emotional poetic type. Within every overly responsible dry, boring type, there is also this inner reckless, inner trickster. So within every individual of whatever shade, there is the inner opposite. So within the process of Jungian individuation, we have the external personality. We also have the repressed qualities that exist within the psyche, within the unconscious. So there are many different ways to approach shadow work. Shadow does not necessarily mean bad or evil or whatever. Sometimes the shadow has very positive qualities. So the shadow simply represents those aspects of the psyche that are repressed. And someone that has a very militaristic type of a tough guy or a tough person type of external personality, there may be an inner repressed sensitive aspect that's really sensitive, and sensitivity and feelings. So within every individual, there is a repressed aspect of the personality. So the key is there are many different ways to work with the repressed qualities, are external, are opposite. I'm talking about all those things that are the polar opposite or perceived to be different than our outward, everyday ego personality. There are many ways to approach this. One of the main ways is through dream work, but today what I would suggest is to just consciously engage in your own opposite. This can take many forms. If you normally dislike a certain type of music, make yourself listen to it. If you have a dislike towards a certain style, make yourself engage in this. And this is really at a smaller level when it comes to music, likes and dislikes, foods. Make yourself engage in things that you normally would be repelled by. And at a deeper level, you get to belief systems. If you are, make yourself connect with those ideologies that you are generally opposed to. Make yourself get exposed to political or religious or philosophical ideas that normally you are straight against. Okay, so this goes into what Crowley said, balance every idea with its opposite. Their union is the destruction of illusion. So this is really the key to breaking down belief structures, dogmatic belief structures. Now, one is able to be exposed to a concept. You can still ideologically disagree, but it diffuses the emotional resistance. If there is an emotional resistance to a certain perspective, then there is some type of an inner bias. So the key is to force yourself to examine those ideas that you're generally opposed to. Now, I myself by no means pretend to be an adept at this matter or to be somehow unbiased. We all have our own levels that we need to work on these things. But this is what I would encourage you to do. This is a much shorter video than normal for me. What I would propose is that this week, get out of the books. Well, you could still read and study, but what I would suggest for you to do this week, make yourself be exposed to belief systems, ideologies that you normally are against. Make yourself get exposed to political or religious ideologies that you normally find distasteful or that you don't agree with. So this is all about diffusing our own biases and coming into contact with other viewpoints. So again, balance every idea with its opposite. Their union is the destruction of illusion. And this is about breaking our own boundaries, breaking the boundaries of the self, so that before you can have a higher mystical union with your own higher self or break the false shell of the outer illusory personality, you need to be able to come into contact with these deeper elements of the self. And this is how you obtain wholeness. You realize that there is much deeper to who we are, deeper down than just this superficial outer personality. So if you're normally dry and boring, make yourself go do something exciting. Go dancing in a nightclub or something. If you're normally... make yourself engage in your own opposite. And the more you have an emotional resistance, then the more that this is probably something that you should get into contact with. Again, you can still disagree with something logically, but it diffuses our own emotional response to these things, so that then we are thinking critically and logically instead of just having a knee-jerk reaction to an ideology or a perspective that we normally oppose or against. And this path, once really understood, you see that this is part of a much deeper process. So that this is part of a much deeper process that has to do as part of a larger initiatory process of inner alchemy. So even if what you're doing seems small or insignificant, it's part of a much larger picture. There's something much deeper going on than it might seem on the surface. So from this, you can begin to incorporate the hidden or the repressed aspects of your own psyche. And this helps one to accomplish wholeness. That we break down some of the limitations and some of the false barriers or boundaries that we've created in regard to who we are as individuals. We tend to have this perspective of this is who I am and this is how I am, and we have this limited, restricted image of who we are, this self-image. But many of these boundaries are artificial, are to be broken down so that we can unite with our own internal opposite, to unite with those repressed, inhibited, or in some ways not as expressed aspects or developed aspects of our own being. And this is to accomplish wholeness. Now, there are different ways to look at this. And again, the mystical marriage can take very many different perspectives. Now, we can look at this in the context of the Kabbalistic tree of life. You have two opposed pillars, Jachin and Boaz, and then you have a middle pillar between them, the reconciler of opposites. So, you have on the one hand loving kindness, and there are many different ways to interpret the Sephiroth. There are many different ways to interpret them. So for at one level, Chesed may be seen as expansive. It may be seen as many different things. And then Geburah could be seen as boundaries or limitations. So there are many, or giving form to things, or time and space. So there are many different ways to look at these Sephiroth. But one way to look at them is that Chesed represents our own loving kindness. I'm sure that you can think of many people that have an imbalance of being a really kind, sensitive, loving, gentle person. I mean, these are wonderful qualities. It's wonderful to be loving and kind and sensitive and generous. These are wonderful qualities for a person to have. But sometimes you need to be assertive. Sometimes you have to give a restriction or a limitation with what you give. If someone is taking advantage of you, if someone is just totally taking advantage of you, at some point you need to put a boundary. You need to set some boundaries with people and things. And that is the nature of Geburah. Now, Geburah is the opposite. It's associated with Mars. This could be seen as our own aggression, our own aggressive, assertive aspect of ourselves, that dynamic, fiery, forceful aspect of ourselves. Now, too much Geburah, too much of this aggressive, fiery aspect could also cause problems in relationships and in life. And also we have the concept of aggression versus passivity. Sometimes we need to have a balance. Sometimes one more than the other. But we need both aspects of our psyches. So that someone that is totally dominated by the aggressive, fiery aspect of their nature needs to get in contact with this cooling, sensitive, loving, and paternal aspect of ourselves. In the same way, and again, Geber is about limitations and discipline. The apex of the pillar of form is Bina. It's all about restriction, discipline, whereas Chesed is about force. We need a balance between these two. At a lower aspect of these two pillars, you see Netzach and Hod. These could be seen in many different ways. Among them, we have our emotional, artistic, creative aspect of our being, which is the force, the energy. And then with Hod, we have our logic, our ideas, our rationality. And of course, in the context of magic, Netzach is our force. Our emotional energy is the force, the fuel that drives a magical ritual. Whereas the concentrated thought is Hod, gives the form to things. So we have the pillars of force and form. But it's good to have a balance between these. To be totally dominated by the left hemisphere of the brain, to be dominated by logic and reason and ideas to the exclusion of that emotional, Venetian, creative, artistic quality, that itself is an imbalance. Someone that's dominated by ideas needs to get in contact with that creative, emotional aspect. Someone that's totally dominated by emotions and sensitivity needs to get into contact with this more arid, rationalistic aspect of personality. Again, someone that is overly passive needs to get in contact with aggression. Someone that's overly aggressive needs to get into the cooling, watery aspect. So that, again, this is a mystical marriage. This is the mystical marriage within our own being. So, the two pillars are on each side of the door of initiation. Initiation is the reconciliation of opposing forces. If you read Liber Aleph, it says something along the lines that an imbalanced force is cruelty. An imbalanced mercy is to allow evil to exist. We need to have a wholeness, to have all aspects of our being. We don't need to section off a certain part of our personality, to externalize it, to project it, because we don't even want to see it within ourselves. We need to obtain wholeness, to experience all aspects of one's being. So these two pillars on the two sides of the threshold, the doors of initiation, these could also be seen as energy currents. Again, you have Ida and Pingala. You have Surya and Rayi. You have these two opposing currents of energy in the body. You have the fiery active energy, and then you have the cool lunar magnetic current. These are to be balanced. And part of this is expressed, as you see in Liber E, the alternated nostril breathing of pranayama is about balancing these two polarities of the energy field. Now, if you take the Hebrew word for spirit, which is ruach, something interesting is that the word spirit in many different languages means breath, so literally breath. The Latin word spiritu, spirit, means breath, and it actually is connected to the Latin word for breathing, which is spirare, where we get the word respiration. Breath is spirit. Ruach is wind or breath. Prana is breath. Pneuma in Greek is breath. So the breath is connected with spirit. And if you look at the Kabbalistic rendering of the word ruach, you have the letter resh, which is connected to the sun, vav, which is the conjunction and chet, which is a simple letter assigned to Cancer, which is ruled by the moon. So if you read the three letters of Ruach in Hebrew, Kabbalistically, Resh, Vav, Chet, you get sun and moon, or gold and silver. So you have this balancing of these polarities. And then you could ascend up the steps of the ladder of lights of initiation. You go up the middle pillar. You reconcile the twin serpents upon the staff of the caduceus. And again, Hermes is all about moving to and fro, or commerce, exchange, communication, reconciliation of opposites. So these are important concepts. Now, in this process of mystical intermarriage, reconciling our own opposites, reconciling the shadow, and also our anima and animus and Jungian individuation, this internal alchemy of intermarriage, which again manifests in as simple areas as getting in contact with music that we normally dislike, or exposing ourselves to styles of dress that we normally dislike, hanging around the types of people that normally make us uncomfortable. If there is an emotional reaction, sometimes this is a warning that you should avoid certain things. That's just common sense. But if there is an irrational, knee-jerk emotional reaction, then it may mean that this is an othering or an externalization, a projection of the repressed aspects of our own psyche. And this is what in analytical psychology is referred to as a projection. We project our anima or animus, or a shadow, or different aspects of ourselves. Sometimes we project the higher aspects of the self to become, in a sense, God forms, if you take that type of a perspective. But in this process of intermarriage, for one thing, you need to look for emotional responses. If you have a knee-jerk emotional response to an ideology, a philosophy, a worldview, a style of dress, or an attitude, then this might be a signal that this is something that you have a bias towards. This is something that you have repressed in your own nature, something that should be explored. Again, sometimes this is a warning signal that it's something legitimately to avoid, but if there is no logical reason, then chances are this is something to explore. So I really encourage my viewers to get out there, get your hands dirty, go involve yourselves in things that make you uncomfortable, to expand yourself. Another thing is to have an inner inventory or self-analysis. Think about those things that you dislike in others that you may want to explore in yourself. Now, one of my favorite books by Crowley is Liber Aleph. And I thought that I would read a certain part of Liber Aleph for you guys. In the chapter under Sigma de Motu Vitae, it says, "Learn then, O my son, that all phenomena are the effect of conflict, even as the universe itself is a nothing, expressed as the difference of two equalities. Or, and thou wilt, as the divorce of Nuit and Hadit. So therefore every marriage dissolveth a more material, and createth a less material complex. This is our way of love, rising ever from ecstasy to ecstasy. So then all high violence, that is to say all consciousness, is the spiritual orgasm of a passion between two lower and grosser opposites. Thus light and heat result from the marriage of hydrogen and oxygen, love from that of man and woman, dhyana or ecstasy from that of the ego and the non-ego. But be thou well grounded in this thesis corollary, that one or two such marriages do but destroy for a time the exacerbation of any complex. To deracinate such is a work of long habit and deep search and darkness for the germ thereof. But this once accomplished, that particular complex is destroyed or sublimated forever." So unite yourself with your own opposite. In the realm of ideas, balance every thought with its opposite. Their union is the destruction of illusion. This is the royal way, the royal road. This is the path to overcoming our own internal conflicts, our own biases, dissolving our complexes, and having the mystical marriage, which eventually can lead to the mystical marriage with the highest attainment. Thank you for joining me, and have a great day.